share and start the webinar. Welcome, Linda and Ramona. We're so glad to have you at the webinar today.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for using a picture of me when I was much younger and thinner. I appreciate that. That's always a great way to start a webinar, Wendy. So I want to introduce Ramona, give everyone a big wave there. Ramona is my cohort on this project, and we got to meet many of you back in October of 2021 at your annual conference. And you may be wondering what we did with all of that information you provided us then. And that's what we're going to share with you today. And I don't know if Mandy has joined us, but Mandy Bailey was a graduate student at the time, and she helped us out quite a bit. But now she actually is working full-time for Sea Grant Extension. So we're really excited for Mandy in her new position. So what we're going to talk about is going to review a little bit of the process that we use to collect the data. And then we're going to introduce you to the community capitals. That's one of those community development frameworks that we use to help us categorize data and figure out the great stuff that y'all are doing. So you're going to hear a whole lot more about that. And we're going to tell you what you told us, because you told us a lot. You know, we collected a lot of information. It was really exciting. I have to tell you, Ramona and I have said this several times, attending the conference and talking with you all was one of the highlights of the year for both of us, because it was just so fun. And of course, as a horticulturist, I really enjoyed talking about plants. I don't get to talk about plants as much as I like to anymore. So that was a lot of fun. And then we'll end the presentation today talking about the next steps and what you can expect to see next. So why did we do this? Well, we did this for a number of reasons. One, we want to showcase the amazing work that Master Gardener volunteers do in Florida, because y'all do some really amazing work. And generally what we do, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, what we've done historically is we collect numbers, we gather numbers. How many people did you talk to? How many soil test kits did you give? How many site visits did you do? How many phone calls did you receive? But we wanted to go a little bit deeper and see what kind of impacts the Master Gardener volunteers are having in the community. What are those broader impacts that we don't typically report and we don't even think about on a regular basis? So we want to be able to report that to UF administration, our elected officials, decision makers, other people in the community throughout the state who might interact with the Master Gardener volunteers, who might have a stake in the Master Gardener program. Another thing we wanted to do was let you all hear from each other about the amazing work that you do. I think there's a lot of power in that, knowing that, you maybe you're in St. Lucie County and you don't get out of the county much, and you may not be aware of what's going on in Alachua County or Duval County, or even as far west as the Panhandle. And so I think it's really awesome when you can hear about the other great stuff Master Gardener volunteers are doing. Not only that, but I think it's a great way to get some ideas too for things you might want to do in your own county. And then we want to know, how can we make the program even better? I mean, we think the Master Gardener volunteer program is pretty darn good. But what can we do to make it even better? And who better to tell us how to make it better than you all, right? Because you all are out there doing the work. So that's why we did this. How we did this, as many of you know, we attended the annual conference in Osceola County back in October, and we started by having a presentation at one of your large group sessions. And if you remember, we had the microphone and we were walking around and asking you guys questions, and you were sharing with us. And then we had some individual conversations. We had a room set up in the hotel, and we asked you to come talk with us. And many of you did. And thank you so much for that. You came and you sat with us and shared some of your stories and wrote those on the wall on some paper or flip charts. And then another way that we collected information, since not everyone could attend the conference in person, we asked you to fill out a form online. That way we could hear from you as well. So we had the large group session, we had the individual conversations, and then we had the online submissions. And we got a few also via email, and we thank you for that too. That was very helpful. So I'm going to turn it over to Ramona.
Great. Thank you, Linda. And good afternoon to all of the Master Gardener volunteers, and to Wendy, thanks for having us here today. So Linda mentioned earlier that we used a framework called community capitals, and this is what you'll see on the next slide. This is the framework that we use to to code, if you would. We needed to have something in place to understand, to evaluate, to put the data, your stories that you shared with us, into some sort of relative framework that could be used to explain what we saw, what we heard, and how that applies within your work. So community capitals, there are 7 of them. You see them in those 7 boxes on the slide. They really look at the multidimensional nature of communities, and a balance of all of those capitals, meaning that you have representation in each of those 7 capitals, allows us to understand that the community is working well together. There is a lot of cohesion. There is a lot of expansion and development in each of the capitals. Sometimes you might see communities where there is a lot of social and human, but there's very little built capital. And you'll see why this is important when we come across the slides that shows you a snapshot of what we heard. The last bullet here is really important. When we build or sustain growth in one capital or 2 capitals, we're likely to foster growth in the other capitals. And you'll see this again on the chart that we're going to share with you. And if you're wondering exactly what does community capitals mean, the next slide actually tells you what this is. So when we think about social capital, this is relationships. This is working with others. This is bridging networks. This is bonding networks. This is really how we do our work together, mutual trust, a sense of a shared future, the groups and organizations. So not just the work between the groups, but also amongst other groups. Human capital, these are the things that you contribute in terms of self-esteem, your education, investment in learning new technology. We just went through the pandemic. The skills that you're learning, PowerPoint, maybe new technology skills. So all of those are the contributions that you as an individual have within the Master Gardener program and have developed as a result of being in the Master Gardener program. Natural capital refers to all of those natural aspects of a community. So we see air, clean water, wildlife, parks. All of these are really good examples of natural capital. I know I heard a lot of stories about natives and biodiversity, so those would be captured under natural capital. The next one is financial. So of course, this has to do something with money. So income and wealth and grants and credit and in-kind might even be featured under a financial story because you're all contributing to that. On the next slide, we'll look at political. So this is your civic activation, right? So it's a measure of social engagement. Communities that are engaged in leadership, public issues, giving voice to issues within the community that maybe impact the Master Gardener program or impact a partnership that you might have for a Master Gardener program. Built refers to infrastructure, buildings, housing, machinery, roads. On the slides, we've mentioned water and sewer and utilities. So these are things that you would use regularly as a Master Gardener volunteer in your program. And then culturally, these include local beliefs and values, history, language, rituals. So what's in the community that, has that connotation of being culturally important when you think about the heritage within the area that your Master Gardener program is located. So Linda just brought up the distribution of community capitals for the Master Gardener program. This is what we heard. And you can see on the bottom of the slide, we coded 136 different story threads. So each of you that shared in online conversations in terms of, virtually through the forum, in person, in the large group, and you could see across this particular graphic, we see a very strong representation of human capital, which I told you were self-esteem, skills development, investment in yourselves as Master Gardener volunteers, social capital, built political, financial. Those are a little bit smaller, but these are really what we see across the program in terms of Master Gardeners. I do want to highlight though that remember, it's only the stories that we heard or that were shared with us that were coded. So there might be lots of other stories that would maybe contribute to built or political or financial, but we did not hear those stories in the work or the data that we got. So just remember, this is again a snapshot of data at that point in time that we were at the October conference and from follow on. So on this particular slide, we see human and social capitals again being pretty high. Again, going back to the notion of it really underscores the value of a Master Gardener program in terms of bridging and bonding, the skills that you are learning, your improved health, and health is mental health, physical health, emotional health, all of those go together to promote self-esteem. Next slide. So what's really nice about all of this, remember we talked earlier about the 7 capitals, is that there is representation from the stories we heard of the Master Gardener program across all 7 capitals, which means you're doing work in all of these areas. So that means you can expand work in social, if you can expand work in build, you can expand work in financial. There might still be more ripples, if you would, in terms of the work that you're currently doing. And what this says is that in all of the stories and all of the communities we heard from, all of your communities are vibrant and they're thriving. And the Master Gardener program is making an impact across Florida, 1 county, 1 subdivision, and 1 yard at a time. And the reason I quoted this like this is because I heard from so many of you at the Master Gardener conference about your work, and you told me specifically about your subdivisions and that how you felt so much impact that, you know, you could start in your yard and that could lead to your subdivision and your HOA and your city and your county taking hold. And I think that speaks to the political capital that you're all wielding within your communities, but also to your social networks, about how you're using your relationships to connect with others to make impacts in these other capitals. On the next slide, here are some of the stories we heard that were coded, if you would, using the capitals framework. So when you stopped by or when you shared online in the forum, you might have told us that there were so many different aspects to find your own niche. Right. So many of you either were really good at working with 4-H youth. So many of you were probably doing community gardens, but there was a place for most of you to find your own niche. Some folks shared that they love planting seeds. It's just so much fun to plant and see them grow. So that particular aspect of germinating and contributing plants for a plant sale. And this one here in the bubble about being energized by listening to client stories and feeling great satisfaction in sharing research-based material from the University of Florida. So this all again speaks to your own skill development, how you feel about the program, and that you're contributing in that way. It helps build you as an individual, but it's also helping to build the Master Gardener program. Next slide. So this was, again, another great story about one of the Master Gardeners in the class turned out to be a roommate from college, and you'd been out of touch for a really long time. So who would have ever thought that, you know, 15 years later as a Master Gardener that you'd run into somebody from college that you'd not been in touch with for a really long time. I think the feeling of trust that we see here in the bubble, this is another thing we heard a lot of in terms of the social capital, that this is a family for you. Master Gardener volunteers, Master Gardener relationships within counties really build a wonderful feeling of trust and relationships. And for a lot of our folks who are transplants to Florida, whether they are from overseas, whether they are from a state that's outside of Florida, you know, Master Gardeners allow them to develop a new network. Again, that's social capital. And they build a new network of friends. They get support from new friends and family. So there's a lot of capital in that social element of connection. Next slide. So we wanted to share with you what it would actually look like if we went ahead and used a tool that's typically used to represent all of the social capitals or capitals within a ripple map. And you can see here at the center of the map is social capital. But then you see lots of spines coming off, and all of these spines are your stories. So what we've done is just pulled out some additional stories. This is what it would look like for social, and there are lots of spines here because you had a lot of entries in social capital. If we did this for a financial or builds, we'd see a little less stories because those were lower capital counts when we looked across the map. So at the top, you found a lot of like-minded people. Right. So again, that speaks to social connections, building capital, bridging capital, and relationships. Meeting like-minded people that love plants and they want to teach and they want to give back to the community. So again, your contributions to communities, not just within the program, it's also outside of the program, and it's also across the state, like Linda mentioned earlier about how you can share and learn from each other's. Plant and herb giveaways and remembering how their grandmother gardened. So again, that generational information, again, of social connections across generations. Mentorship, that's a big part of this, right? Master Gardener volunteers are mentoring each other. Master Gardener coordinators are mentoring you through the process of training. So now everywhere you go, you're part of a family, and this gets connected into the community. And lastly, here on this one is a highlight. What an incredible experience to know that we can share information with the public, right? We're so lucky to be part of a team that can help to contribute. So you're educators in and of yourself, you're supporting the mission, but these are all great stories that fall under the social capital in the community capitals framework. So built environment, I really like this quote about changing my subdivision 1 yard at a time. So you're looking at making an impact in the built infrastructure of your local communities. Folks are adding rain barrels and native habitat and planting hedges. I mean, you're again impacting what your natural environment looks like, but it's also your built environment. So there are two ways. Another thing to consider too with some of these stories is that many of your stories don't just align with one capital. There are lots of different capitals. So sometimes you'll tell us a story about what you're doing and it's built, but there's an element of social capital because you're talking to your neighbors about what you've done, or there's an element of finance because you've done this, you were actually able to sell it and make money. So there's lots of ways that your stories were coded because of how you were able to connect so many elements of the capitals together. Next slide. Financial, here's an example of someone who shared a story where the plant fair was pretty small in the beginning and then it grew leaps and bounds and 200 people lined up one day and oh my goodness, all the plants were gone and we had enough money to run programs for the rest of the year. So success in terms of what you're using, which is leveraging your social capital and your human capital, the skills you have, the network you have, the relationships you have, and look at what it results in. It results in attaining enough financial money or investment to run programs for the rest of the year. The other example is about pepper plants and tomato plants that were sold at the plant sale, and you're making $5,000 sold out in an hour. That's a great impact, right? So that's marketing success, but also financial success in terms of how much money you made. And this other one here in the bubble at the bottom, it's blue. Festival fundraising efforts have tripled with the business model. And now we're looking at 2-day events. So again, taking something that starts off pretty small and generating it into a much larger idea, which would have a much larger impact. So in a story like this, we see that there is finance because you're making money, but there's also the element of thinking about the built capital that comes along with it, because now you can put in a greenhouse, you can put in a hydroponic system, because sometimes you're spending the money to do that. So there are lots of different ways that your stories are aligned with multiple elements of a community capital framework. Next slide. And cultural capital. So a lot of times, many of you came by and talked about that generational impact and the experience of growing food. It's very experiential, but it's also very personal. So wanting to be able to support that. And I think of that from a sustainability perspective when we think about intergenerational commitment and how do we support the others. The second quote here is about growing food in the food desert and giving them the ability to have control. So again, looking at how even as a master gardener, you can help people be better with their backyard gardening, but sometimes it's backyard gardening with a view towards, filling a financial gap in terms of a food financial gap, right? So you allow people to be able to grow food for their own family, which would also impact their food budget positively, right? So they don't have to spend as much in the grocery store. Maybe they're getting a lot more fresh produce at home, and that also helps with their own personal mental health and emotional well-being. So I think this is really good in terms of culturally connecting people with food and also creating that sense of empowerment. Next slide. Natural capital, we talked about this earlier. It's what impacts you make within the environment when we think about our air and water quality. So in this particular example, this group is walking along the beaches of Amelia and pulling out invasive tumbleweeds. So you're removing invasives, you're allowing the natives to thrive, and that certainly makes a difference within the natural environment. And the second one is about bees. We hear a lot about bees, right? And how bees are important for us within our ecosystem. So this is bumblebees in the neighborhood that you had not seen in many years. And I think in some of these too, because you're a master gardener volunteers within the community, you're really attuned to how the community changes over time, both from the perspective of social in terms of the relationships, the calls you get at the front desk or on the phone line, but also in terms of how the natural environment is being changed. If you walk down a street and your neighbor knows you now as a master gardener and they know that you can help them with a backyard problem or their irrigation issue. So I think that's lots of different ways that master gardeners are contributing to the community. Next slide. And then lastly, political capital. So what does political capital refer to, right? How we can use our influence to change things. So some folks were changing the minds of the community towards preserving the environments and eradicating invasives. So focusing on natives, if you would, trying to really change the environment. The other one is looking at ordinances. When we think about political capital, I think about how do we leverage our relationships in such a way that we can make an impact on policy, right? So in this case, it was building permits, but also thinking about what trees are best for our community. We see a lot of communities put in trees, and then 5 years later, they don't survive, they don't thrive in that place, they're not suited to that particular location. And then there is certainly the element of money that you have to replace these trees. So looking at the value of trees, but also looking at the value of trees within property rights and how the tree can contribute. I know there are lots of studies on how trees can contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also to beautification projects within a community. And I think this one here on strategic planning, you started with one thing in mind and you came out with so many other things. So again, the ripple effects of what being involved in one project can lead in terms of connecting to other projects. So maybe perhaps in the element here of looking at trees, maybe you looked at sidewalks and maybe you looked at maintenance over the course of time in terms of helping a city rewrite its ordinances. Linda? Yes,
Yeah,
are you surprised?
Yeah, I think this is your slide yet, Ramona. Maybe not. We'll share it. How's that?
Yes.
So did anything surprise you that you heard? You can drop this in the, I know Wendy said not to use the chat box, but if you want to drop something in the chat box, we would love to know if any of this surprises you at all, or you could put it in the Q&A box as well. So take a moment and think, did any of this surprise you? Oh, I see we got stuff coming in, Ramona. No surprise.
Did you perhaps expect a capital based on the definitions we showed to be stronger? So in the beginning, we shared that human capital and social capital were very high, and some of the others they were all represented, but they may not have been represented as high in terms of the overall counts.
Well, so far, no one is surprised.
No, I like that Jenny says that it reaffirms the value of the Master Gardener volunteer program.
And Anne says that these capitals reflect her experiences.
Yes, that's a good comment, Stephanie. I think that speaks to the strength of the program, and that's what we wanted to highlight. That speaks to the fact that your work in maybe the two stronger categories has rollover or spin-over effects in all of the others. And as I mentioned earlier, it's an opportunity to think about how you could invest more, but I think it just really depends on the landscape that you're working in. So.
And Wendy said that she was surprised the social capital was so high.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Linda, about it's a reminder of the wide-reaching effects of the Master Gardener program.
Yeah. Yeah, someone said that they're surprised the natural capital wasn't stronger. I agree. But I think it's partly how it's framed also. Y'all are doing stuff for the natural environment. However, sometimes those stories are intertwined with the social and the human and those other capitals. So a lot of these capitals we could have put under the natural capital, but they had other little nuggets that really lent themselves more towards one of the other capitals.
And I would also remind us too that, remember, this is a point in time collection. So in October, based on what we heard, we could do this again, and we may hear stories that might speak to more social capital or cultural capital or built capital. So it really is a representation of who is sharing stories and what stories we hear.
And Linda asked, do we have a goal to increase some of the lower categories? And that's a good question. We're going to dive into that strategic planning a little bit here in a minute. But, typically what we know from the research is that when a lot of emphasis is being put on one capital, just by the nature of that, the other capitals start to grow. So I think we would see if we come back a year later, 2 years later, and do this again, we might see growth in those other capitals. And partly also because now you're aware of those capitals. So I think that helps also. Some good comments here. Okay, thank you all for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about strategic planning. That was another part of the activities that we had set up at the conference and in the online form. We were asking you, what should the Master Gardener program be doing that it is currently not doing? Or what would be your vision of the Master Gardener program in the future? What would that look like? And so we just put a snapshot here of a few things that you said. We have a long list, and we will send that to Wendy at another time, and I'm sure she will get back to you all on that. But here's a few things. How can we do a better job of following up with people we help to see if they implemented our recommendation? I really love this because I think even as extension faculty, we struggle with this. We teach a class, we help someone, and it's difficult to remember or to prioritize coming back to those people later, 6 months to a year later, to see if they actually did, or if they actually used any of the information that we gave them. So I think that's a real challenge. And that's something that I'm glad somebody brought that up, because I think we do need to get better at that. It's easier, or we need easier communication strategy internally and externally. I think that's another great comment. And I know even extension faculty, those of us out there in the field, feel the same way. I think communication is always something that can be improved with any organization. And certainly I can see the need for improving that with the Master Gardener volunteers. And then there were several conversations that we had in person around the potential for a mentoring program, a Master Gardener volunteer mentor program for those new trainees who might feel a little anxious about answering the phones. That's kind of scary, right? You know, you're going to answer the phones and you have no idea what the question is going to be. And so, you know, what kind of opportunities are there for a mentoring program? So something we might want to look at. You said that we need more evening weekend programs to appeal to more people, make classes more accessible, not just the MGV program classes, but also the FFL classes. I couldn't agree more. That's another challenge that even those of us, extension faculty have. There are only so many hours in a day and so many hours in a week, and it's really difficult to schedule these evening and weekend programs. So that's something that we might want to take a closer look at and see how we could do that. Use more Master Gardener volunteer programs to help promote message of resource conservation, water, energy, fertilizer, and promote native species. Yeah, I'm all on board on that. I'm sure Ramona is too, since Ramona does a lot of sustainability education. That's probably why she stuck that in this PowerPoint, I bet. She did put that one in there. So yeah, I totally agree. And there's a lot of synergy between all of these things: the water, the energy, the fertilizer, right? And thinking about the landscape as a systems, approaching it from a systems perspective, I think is really important. And that's how we try to teach sustainability. Also try to look at the different components of sustainability, like food, water, and energy. Those are a system and they all work together. You eat an orange, but it requires water to grow that orange, and energy is involved in that process. And then someone said that more neighborhood associations partnering with MGVs. I think there's probably a lot of potential there as well. So you guys had a lot to say. There's a lot more, like I said before, but for the sake of time, we didn't want to bore you with lots and lots and lots of statements. But these are kind of the highlights. And so, like I said before, we will take these and put these together in a report and share that out with Wendy. So the big question on your mind might be, what next? And I'm going to ask Ramona to unmute and help me out here, talking about what's next. And even Wendy, feel free to chime in here and share what you might be thinking, how you would like to share this information with the MGVs. We know for sure Ramona and I are going to write a report to summarize all of this to share with Wendy. And we'll be doing that in the coming weeks.
Wendy, I think a question too, just looking across the chat in terms of the feedback that we got from so many of the volunteers who are listening today is the snapshot across, the stories of capitals, that you can see what's really high to what's really low. You notice that we also shared a ripple map, if you would. It's not a perfect ripple map, but it's a visual representation of the capitals stories that we heard by capitals. So that could be something that we can also do for the other capitals. We just use that today as a sample to show you, like, when you look across it, social capital is pretty high, but what stories were actually in there? We only shared a couple of those stories today. So I think what's next to be looking, in terms of across all stories, that summary analysis, but also looking at visual pieces. I think the personal anecdotal stories are really impactful for future reporting. Perhaps they could be used as part of a recruiting campaign. It's in the words of the Master Gardener volunteers. These are their stories. These are their thoughts about how that could be used for further engagement.
Great. No, that's really good. And what's already come out of this, as far as, things that we really need to focus on, that maybe a statewide best practices for mentor programs, and then this concept of the communication, communicating with the staff, communicating with each other, communicating with the community. I think that really bubbles up as something that should be a priority. So I'm hearing mentoring is a priority, and this internal external communication is a priority. This is great. This is so helpful, because we just really want the program to be better and focusing on the right things. And we know that the right things are being done out there. So if we can just do a good job of listening and sussing those out, I think we can really make a nice plan for the next few coming years, right?
Yeah, and I think another important part of all this process, I mentioned this in the very beginning, but I think it's something that we all need to consider, is how do we communicate the value of the Master Gardener Volunteer Program to people in the community, whether they are elected officials who are supporting county budgets, or whether it's state legislatures who support the IFAS budget. I think it's really important to share with them that it's not just about fertilizer and irrigation, even though they should really be concerned about that, but it does go beyond that. And I think that's an important story to tell, and like I said earlier, we're really good about saying that, the Polk County Master Gardeners reached X number of people in 2022, but we haven't been very good about telling the full story of what that actually means. And so I think we have a real opportunity to do that here, to share that.
Good. That's really good. I think so too. I generate an annual report that's seen by, it's on the website and it's seen by people, but how are we sharing that knowledge? Could that be a wrap-up slide for, or included when people are going to the plant sale, they get a little info sheet on the Master Gardener Program, and then we're able to share statewide numbers as well as local numbers, and use that again as recruiting. But it's not the numbers that we're dealing with here. We're talking about real life stories, the program changing the volunteers' life, and then changing their clientele's, improving their clientele situation as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Wendy, because I think, we saw it in the summary analysis of capitals, and then a couple of questions in the chat box about perhaps how would we grow our impact in the other capitals that are not as large as human and social. And I think that goes back to maybe individual programs. Some programs might be really strong in a human social, but they might have a goal of achieving a new greenhouse or something like that. So that could be like, would that political financial piece could come as a result. So I think the answer, if you would, in essence, to that really goes back to the mission vision of a Master Gardener Volunteer Program, but also individually in certain places, would they be looking towards increasing financial because they have a need in that area, or a facility need if it was something in the built area. Maybe they needed a new greenhouse to support, again, or a potting shed. Is that something that's going to enhance the impact of the Master Gardener Program within that local community?
Right. Denise Hawks, I saw your comment about the purchasing card and the centralization of the funds. That's certainly, I wish I had that kind of power, but that was never my decision. That's several pay grades above me to have the monies into the 182 accounts and the purchasing cards. So that would be a discussion to have with your local county coordinator and your county extension director to see how those funds could be used a little bit more liberally by the Master Gardener volunteers. Yeah. But I like the discussion here about the homeowners associations. I think that I feel like we are kind of the spies or the undercover agents in our HOAs, and we really can make a lot of changes as we provide education and modeling of our own landscapes, and then working with those decision makers at the HOA to kind of be aware of the resources that IFAS has and how we can help them make changes for the better there. Yeah, and Mary Ross saying corporate landscaping does not foster Florida-friendly landscaping. I think we can all make those changes, and imagine how empowered you could be to say to your HOA board, you know, are the people who are doing our common areas, are they GIBMP certified? And are they following these practices? And if they're not, then that would be a way that we could ask them to be to take the training that IFAS offers, and they have to have that license to go ahead and apply fertilizer and even do any kind of lawn maintenance. They need to have that certificate that shows that they have gone through that sort of training. So those are great inputs there. And getting out there and really meeting the people. I think showing up at different places, like at I know farmers markets are pretty normal, but not everybody knows how to find us and where to find us. So maybe that might be a way to outreach. You know, the Master Gardeners are at the extension office, but where else are they? How can we get that publicized out in the county so folks can meet up with us?
That's a great point. And I think especially in densely urban areas of the state, I think it's even more challenging because there's so much noise, right? There's just so many people and so many other options. I think it's really difficult to stand out. And so there's got to be a way to do that, but that is a challenge.
And there are barriers that show up. Diane is asking, do you pay for your booth at the farmer's market? You know, maybe it's $100 a year, but I think that's a good use of Master Gardener funds to pay for something like that. But there's a farmer's market in the Panhandle that won't let the Master Gardeners in until they show proof of liability insurance, and they're making them jump through all of those hoops. And of course, we're UF, we have liability insurance. They're like, no, we need the form and we need this form. And so sometimes it's not easy to get into these venues. You think it's a slam dunk, and then there are these barriers that come up. So we need to be able to help I need to be able to work with the agents and the CEDs to make it easy for us to be in the venues where we need to be.
And some comments about libraries too. Libraries are always a great place to find people and to meet people.
For sure.
Great. Well, that's all we have. We are happy to answer questions if you have any questions or continue this discussion. I know we're finished up a little bit early, but I'd say better early than late, right?
You know, Mandy is on, and Mandy, if you're out there still, I'd like to kind of, if you want to tap in the chat box real quick, I'd love to hear, some of your takeaways as someone who hadn't had a lot of experience with the Master Gardeners before. So if you're there, Mandy, go ahead and type in. Rita Law, longtime extension professional, said that they have a table at the garden center at 2 of the Lowe's in Seminole County, and we know that people go to retail spaces to look for horticulture information, so having Master Gardeners out at retail space is good. See if Mandy wants to chime in.
It's always good to see old friends at these things, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Sarasota has master gardeners in many of the libraries. Absolutely, many. So Linda, when people close out of this webinar today, they have a long essay box if they wanted to add any more information. When they close out and the Qualtrics survey pops up, they're going to get the usual questions, but they also are going to get another essay box if they would like to add some additional comments about their experience and what they've heard today and kind of give a little bit of feedback too. Okay, so Mandy has chimed in. She enjoyed meeting many of the master gardeners and hearing the stories shared at the conference and elsewhere. Working with these stories definitely reveals the important impacts of the Master Gardener program, and that goes far beyond plants and gardening, and how individuals benefit of being part of the program has ripple effects that strengthen neighborhoods and communities as well as Florida's natural world. That's wonderful. Oh, Dr. Gould says, I wonder why so few men become master gardeners. Any initiatives to increase the participation by men? Well, that is, to me, that should be an easy one, Dr. Gould. But, the other question of further diversity in the program, I feel should be a priority going forward. We have a certain look, us master gardeners, and I would like to get that a little bit more diversified going forward. And I think it is offering the classes at different times and different venues, but I think that is definitely should be a strategic intention going forward. Why so few men? I'm not quite sure. We should ask the men out there, and maybe we need to be more, I think the men in the program should recruit more men in the program. Linda and Ramona, what are your thoughts? Okay, Denise says that she thinks that the men might be more interested in fishing and watching games. And I was thinking they have maybe a little bit more traditional civic groups like Rotary or Kiwanis or golfing, or those seem to be a little bit more male dominated, but I think we can try to recruit them a little bit more intentionally.
I was going to chime in similar to what Diane put in the chat box about, if we vary or make a little bit more wider the availability of classes, it might make it easier for us to recruit, men into the program. A lot of them are on the weekends, they kind of get caught up on what they're doing. That might make it harder for them to donate their volunteer hours in some of these instances as well. So that could be one of the limitations, if not, but also in terms of drawing a younger audience to the Master Gardener program.
Mm-hmm. And with so many people working from home or with flexible work schedules, I think that we probably will be able to get trending younger, or maybe getting it diversified as we go on. Yvonne says maybe men are still working a job and haven't had the time. Sometimes the clerical nature of manning the desk is daunting. And Janice says the MG men in our group tend to get recruited for the heavy lifting. Maybe that's off-putting. And okay, and Mary wants me to know that women love golf and tennis. That's true. Our class was even men and women despite an all-day program. Okay, good. My class required 10 hours a day during the week, hard for those with active careers. Yep. Okay, great. Basum and the Polk County said that they had a high degree of men, and I think the more men in the program perhaps attracts more men in the program. And
we have a comment in the question answer box. Someone says there is a study that says less men volunteer than women on average. So that's interesting. Not surprising, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that I don't mean not surprising in a bad way. It's just, by the nature of a lot of volunteer activities, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some great discussion here on increasing diversity. I think sometimes the first step is to identify the barriers, right? Because a lot of people love to garden, but what are the barriers to being a Master Gardener volunteer?
Mhm. You know, sometimes, Linda, I think just the words University of Florida, that's kind of scary. You know, that's the sign outside of our doors, University of Florida. If you haven't, you know, if you're not associated with a school or something like that, that might be off-putting. And then we have this title, Master Gardener, which makes you seem like you have to know everything. You know, that it is the nature of our program. We're not going to change the name, but I think understanding that when we do our communication might help to reach out to a larger group.
Yeah, I agree with that. I remember back in my days as a Master Gardener coordinator, I heard that frequently from people. As well, I didn't think I could do that because I don't feel like I'm a master at, you know, being or at gardening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure any of us are. I'm always learning.
Right. We're always learning, and then there's always something new coming up that we can learn about. So it's always there's always a challenge.
Yep.
All right, Linda, how did you want to wrap it up today?
Well, I want to wrap it up, and I'll let Ramona chime in here also. But I want to thank Ramona and Mandy for their work, and you know, they're a great team to work with. Wendy, thank you so much for asking us to do this, not just today, but the whole project, because it's been really it's been a lot of fun. And most of all, I want to thank you, Master Gardener volunteers, for all the work you do and for being so open and honest with us and willing to share your stories. We really appreciate that.
Well, I don't really have much to add. Linda just said it all right there. I think definitely for sure reiterating our thanks to the Master Gardeners. You were also welcoming and open at the conference. We enjoyed the time we spent with you in the back room around the corner. You know, we had to get directions, and many of you still found us there and came by to tell your stories. So we really enjoyed that. We enjoyed writing your stories into our butcher paper that was on the wall. We hopefully would look forward to doing this again with you. I think we heard a lot of stories about encouragement in the larger session, you know, when folks heard about stories in one county and how that inspired them to think about how they can approach a similar problem in terms of another county. So maybe, Wendy, not just mentorship individually in program, but mentorship across the state, county by county, and how that maybe impacts the overall statewide Master Gardener program, because there are projects in one county that could inspire others in terms of the lessons learned. So thanks to everybody for their time. There was a question in the chat box as it moves by really quickly about how will they be connected to slides and other information. I think once we have the reports put together and we've come to an agreement with Wendy in terms of visuals that she might need for her program, and then how we would collate the input for the strategic plan in terms of ideas, then we would be more than willing to put it on a site that you can all be able to go to and retrieve and access that.
Okay, and that will happen. We'll be putting that on the website. The website's going to be getting a revamp, but that will be there. Also, the recording of this will be posted where our normal webinars are posted every year or every month. Once the subtitles are generated, we'll be able to get those on there. So I want to thank you, Ramona and Linda, for being able to do this for us, and thanking the administration who allowed you to be able, and for you all to bring your special skills, not just as a horticulture agent and a sustainability agent, but your wonderful leadership skills and your planning skills that you bring to University of Florida. I really appreciate that very much. And then we'll be taking our next steps. But I also want to thank the Master Gardeners. Normally when you tune in, and the last Thursday of the month, we have a wonderful plant talk, and we'll talk about plants, but this is really important for us planning and moving forward, moving this program forward for Florida and for Floridians and for the Master Gardener program. So thank you all. And thank you, especially Linda and Ramona, for all your hard work. It does not go unnoticed. It looks like a lot of work. And thank you, Mandy, too. So. All right, you all, go ahead and put any additional comments in the Qualtrics box, and we will see you next month at the Citrus Talk. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.